Well, welcome back. We are viewing chapter 4 today. Last time we talked about a little bit about the canonization process and the characteristics that the examiners were looking for. In a way, this is a continuation of that, only now we're reflecting on virtues. So virtues are, of course, gifts from God, from the Holy Spirit. And in Angela's case, they came up with 3 virtues. I always think wisdom is the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think that's interesting that they start, well, maybe not. Wisdom, the next one is prophecy,
Mm-hmm.
and then the final one is discernment.
Discernment.
Yes. And they said they found that she had practiced those virtues in a heroic way. Now, that always confuses me because I don't see how she ever did anything heroic.
Yeah.
But I think they're not looking at things that she did,
Mm-hmm.
but the way she was.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk about wisdom first. Wisdom is so often associated with age
Mm-hmm.
because, although sometimes I've heard little children say very wise things,
True.
but generally that just rises to the surface quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But age seems to make wise people out of all of us if we're paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key.
That's the
If
key.
you're paying
If you're
attention.
paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, life just goes by you,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just like a blank wall when you get finished.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's to be a prayer that we said a lot when we prayed for the gift of wisdom. Give us a taste for what is right and just. I like that phrase,
Mm-hmm.
a taste, because it has something to do with a feel,
Instinct.
instinct.
Mhm.
And so, when somebody is wise and they tell you something and you say, how did you know that? And sometimes the answer is, I just know it.
Mm-hmm.
Or I have a gut feeling that this is the way it is. Sometimes wisdom is like that. It comes from within the person. It's a gut feeling, but it's right and just. It has that sense to it. So that is not beyond us to have that gift of wisdom. In fact, we pray for that,
Mm-hmm.
that we can be wise, not smart, because there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom and understanding. Those 3 are often put together, but they're slightly different parts, like a facet of the same thing. But wisdom has to do with having a taste for what is right and just.
Can I ask you about that, a taste? You said that's a prayer that you say a taste. So they said instinct, but taste to me seems like I don't ingest all of it. I just get a taste of it. So how do you view that word? When you pray that, give us a taste of what is right or just, sounds as if I don't really have the wisdom.
Well, I think we say people about their clothing, you have such good taste.
Okay.
So,
It's like make me,
yes.
make wisdom a part of me. Give me a desire to achieve wisdom. That's how I took it.
Okay. Not give me a taste of it,
Not
but
give me
give
a
me
little
a
bit.
taste for that, so I have the inclination to be someone of justice. Okay. Thank you for that
Well, that
clarification.
helped because that clarifies that for all of us.
Mhm.
So we look at Angela, and so how did she demonstrate that? So, I don't know, I couldn't tell you an heroic way she did that.
Mhm.
But obviously other people saw that in her.
Mhm.
I always like to think about the way people were attracted to her.
Mhm.
I think in her life, she shows that she reflected in her life and that she came to conclusions from that inner sense of right and just.
Mhm.
So, for instance, they caught up right away about if you pay attention.
Mhm.
Okay, so in her life, Angela had had a religious experience of some kind. You can call it what you will. You can call it a vision, which is generally the way we speak of that. But however, whatever the vision was like, it was a religious, very powerful religious experience. And so many of us have, I mean, we all have religious experiences. You could probably name 5 right off the bat of things that have happened to you in your lifetime that you realized was like a flash of wisdom, an understanding of something. But most of the time we just dismiss that. It's like, oh, wasn't that nice? But I should just forget that because, you know, part of that was my imagination. And so we denigrate our experiences, which is not really a good thing to do. Because when you really come down to it, that's all we have, are our experiences. So in a way, how do you know anything without an experience of it or some idea of an experience of it? Okay, well, Angela, like many wise people, believed her experience and held on to it, not in such a way that she wanted to repeat it, because, oh, so you walk down a lane and it's a beautiful spring morning and you think, oh, this is wonderful, and you have a feeling of well-being and whatever. So that was really good. I'll do that again. Next time I go down there, it's, well, nothing is there. So that's kind of nostalgic if I'm longing back for that experience. But it's more like, what did this experience say to me? What's it about in my life? So an experience of walking down a lane may last into an appreciation of nature, and that may grow, which is not nostalgic. I'm not trying to repeat that experience. I'm trying to be open to what caused that beauty. So that's the way it was with Angela. Now, I don't know what all that vision said to Angela, because you hear different stories. I think that's, always am amused by it, because some will tell you she knew what she was supposed to do, that she was going to found a congregation of women. And that always makes me chuckle, because she never did that. But basically, what she learned from that vision was that God loved her. Now, isn't that simple? I mean, God loves us all, and we know that. However, there are times in our lifetime we don't know what causes it, or it's just like a gift. And we come to the sense, I am loved. God loves me. I pray that everybody has that experience, that somewhere they know they are loved by God, because love transforms us. Anyway, so Angela had that experience of God, and out of that, her life view was changed. Sometimes I hear people talk, especially I'm very critical of preachers, and when I hear them talk, I think, what experience of God have you had that you're saying what you're saying? Is that coming out of your experience, or is that out of a book? Because you can tell when somebody is talking out of something that is part of them. They know what they're saying. So Angela was like that. That was very attractive to people. So they sought her out as a wisdom figure. I don't know if she liked all the people who sought her out. You know, the Duke of Sforza, who became the Duke of Milan. I don't know if she liked him or not, but she sure went to a great deal of trouble to be in touch with him. I've told you this before now. When I finally saw his castle, I was with Sister Sarah Stabel, who is very little, very short. Well, the castle is huge, so it's a museum now. So we started up the hill to see if we could get in the castle. Well, of course it was locked, but I kept thinking, 2 little figures going up that hill. It was more like a a big hill.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the Duke lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kept visioning Angela, who was small, climbing that hill to get up there. Or did he send a chariot or something down to pick her up? I don't know that. She walked, which is very interesting. I mean, that's a hefty walk
Mm-hmm.
from Brescia, where she lived, to Milan. Now, surely she had a horse, or maybe a wagon or something, or maybe she walked it, I don't know. Because she made a number of pilgrimages in her life, and maybe that was just one of them. Anyway, people like the Duke sought her out. Sometimes he went to Brescia, so she was kind of like his spiritual director. It wasn't just a once, how do you do, Duke, I'm happy to meet you. But it was a relationship that she built, and he pursued it because he knew she was a wise woman and would give him loving advice or listen to him lovingly. So wisdom shows up in the way people are with God, but also with the way people are with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Because someone who is truly wise is loving. I don't know, you're both grandmothers. You know, grandmothers are the most, I don't know, loving people you can meet,
Mm-hmm.
and they're wise. They always know the right thing to say. At least that's how it strikes me.
Mm-hmm.
I have a niece who's a grandmother, and she seems so young to me because I used to change her diapers when she was, and now she's a
And now she's a
grandmother,
grandmother.
and she has 10 grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
and there are 2 little boys in one family, and they're very dear children, very spoiled. And the one little boy, they visited her home. Sometimes they come and stay with her for a day or so. Anyway, the one little boy had a meltdown, and he screamed and hollered, and I don't know if he kicked his feet, but he really had a meltdown. And she said to him very quietly, "Go in the other room. We don't let that happen in our house." So she put him in another room, and then she went into him later after he stopped screaming, and she held him on her lap, and she said, "You know how much I love you?" She said, "You know how Grammy loves you. All the things we've done together," and he was so, and so she said, "So I really love you, and I love to have you come to my house, and I want you to keep doing that, but I don't want you to behave like you did." That doesn't help you any, does it? No. So it's like, so they had a quiet talk, and when they got finished, he threw his arms around her and hugged her, like he got it.
Yeah.
But she was his wisdom, because she didn't scold him or whatever. I thought, I don't know how she got that wise. It's wonderful. I think it's the grandmother's instinct, because the mother and father were going to come and get the kid, right? But
Right.
there was that kind of, I don't know, openness and welcoming sense, and that had to have come from wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know if she ever took classes in child education.
Right.
She was a teacher for many years, but not of little children. Somewhere there was an instinct, a taste, as it were, for how to be with somebody you love, even when they're carrying on like you wish they would stop. So
Right.
I like to think of that as an example of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if she would approve or would agree with me. I don't know that. But I almost cried when I heard her say that, the story that she told, because I found that very tender. And what a way to be with a child. He's only 4, 5, I mean, he's not a big kid, so he did not know a lot of things,
Right.
but he knows that you don't throw a fit at Grammy's house. You just don't we don't do that here. So I found that to be very helpful to me when I thought about wisdom. I've met a lot of wise people in my life, haven't you?
Yes.
And aren't they wonderful to be with? The thing about real wise people, I think, is that they don't tell you what to do. But they will listen in a way that other people don't seem to be able to listen until you get to your own wisdom, and then they can affirm that. Have you experienced that?
it's something I hadn't thought about when you said, because you think of the wise person being the person who offers the advice,
Well,
you know? So it's interesting to think about that experience that helps the wise person help others to have the experience themselves, to gain the wisdom themselves. Because when we say it's an experience, then you have to experience that, come to that. So I hadn't thought about that as the wise person, maybe asking the right questions or listening carefully to allow that person to come to
their own wisdom.
Yeah.
Yes, you know, it's always so important to know who you think God is, but it's also important that you know who you think you are.
Mm.
Sometimes when I watch TV and I hear especially politicians talk, I think, have you ever been loved?
Mm.
Can you speak about love out of your own experience? Are you mouthing something? So it's who we think we are that counts a whole lot toward our wisdom. Because if we are truly wise and our self-knowledge is rooted in God's love, there's nothing to be afraid of. You know, I don't have anything that you can't have.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that freedom. I've met a number of people like that who are so sure of themselves because they're sure of God and God's love for them. That brings a lot of freedom. So I would say a wise person is free.
Mm-hmm.
And that was certainly true of Angela. We don't ever get around to hearing all the trials that she went through because her way of living was not smart, you know. She was told, you can't do that. Have all those women running around doing their own thing. This was the age of coming to independence. This was the Renaissance, when humanism finally broke through and people started paying attention to the individual. Well, if you started doing that with a group of women, that could be very dangerous in the eyes of a lot of people. And that's what Angela was up against. We'll talk about that when we get to discernment.
Mm-hmm.
But because she was comfortable in her own skin, so to speak, and accepted who she was, then other people could be with her, and she was not a threat to them, nor were they a threat to her. Okay, get on to the next one, and it's prophecy. I always think that's an interesting topic because we have a way of thinking that the prophet knows the future,
Mm-hmm.
like a fortune teller. But that isn't what prophecy is. Prophecy is a way of seeing. It's like seeing as God sees. That's what the great prophets did. They warned the Jews, this is going to happen if you don't change your ways. Not because they saw in the future what was going to happen, but the way the people were behaving, I mean, they were headed for something that anybody who had eyes to see could see it.
so a logical corollary.
Yes. Yes. We have a hard time with that, you know,
Yeah.
because
Logic is tough.
Yes. Yes, and we're protecting ourselves.
Mhm.
So the wise person doesn't need to do that, and so that frees them to be prophetic. I don't try. Okay, somebody like Mr. Mandela was a wise man. He suffered so much in his lifetime, but when he got finished, he was not bitter nor vindictive. He was gentle and knew a way to bring about reconciliation. That's what he strove to do when the years that he had left after he was released from prison. So he was a wise man. He learned a lot from his own experience, particularly of suffering. It did not break his spirit because deep down he knew who he was. And somehow or another, he knew what he was called to do
Mhm.
because he laid down his life for his people. He really did. When I was in Africa, we passed his house. He was out of prison, but he had not been elected president. But the sisters I was with all spoke in hushed voices. That's where Mandela lives. So it was like we kind of genuflected before his house. I kept hoping that I would get to see him, but I didn't. I didn't see him. But that, he's a wisdom figure from more modern days. I'd be afraid to say the names of people who are living. But I'll dare this one. I rather suspect John McCain was a wisdom figure, and that he saw some things he tried to warn us about. He certainly suffered a lot physically at the end, but there was a calmness about him, a sureness about him that he didn't need to scream and shout. So there are many modern examples. Their grandmothers. I always have a special love for grandmothers. So they may say to you, if you keep doing that, you're going to end up getting hurt, or you're going to end up being in trouble. So it's like they're not prophetic in the sense of telling you when the world's going to end, but they're telling you this is what's going to go. This is how life works. So Angela had that, apparently, to a high degree. Now, that would have made her that would have made her a great gift to the people she lived with, because they could rely on her experience of life and of her willingness to share it with them. By the time she started her public life, she had lost her mother and father, her older brother, her older sister, and so she and her younger brother were the only two left in that particular family. So she knew what suffering was like. She also lived in a time where there was a lot of suffering. There were wars going on, and people were being killed, and people were sick, and the disparity between the rich and the poor was breathtaking, because some people lived with nothing, and other people lived in a wealth that I have never even imagined. So she knew what suffering looked like, and instead of its closing her off and making her self-protective, it opened her to loving other people and being willing, as the Karasin says, as we always state, an openness and eagerness to serve the needs of others, because she was a contemplative. It's amazing. Okay, so there you've got prophecy. I don't know what else to say about it. She saw things that other people did not see. And then, the last one is one that I really like to talk about, and that is discernment, discernment of spirits. And discernment builds on the other virtues that we've talked about, certainly wisdom, and that insight of where we're going, so to speak. So it's kind of built on that. Discernment is not deciding between which dress am I going to wear today. It's not decisions, it's a way of life. And because it is kind of built on wisdom, it deals with reflection and attention. That when you said that, babe, I thought that's the answer to so many things. Jesus talked a lot about love, but he talked about discernment more. He never used that word, but he would say, blessed are your eyes that have seen what you see, or your ears that have heard what you hear. So he expected his followers to be discerners. Now, I don't know how long it took them to get that way, because sometimes you want to say, Jesus, why did you ever choose so-and-so? Peter was about one of the really lacking in discernment, because he jumped off did this, did that, shall I call fire down on them? The disciples said, right away, they had something to solve a problem without any thought, without any wisdom. So there was no discernment going on there. But as they lived their lives, they grew into that discernment, ability to know one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the most difficult things maybe they had to discern, and it took them a while, was should they allow the Gentiles to come into the community? Because, and if they do they have to be circumcised? To us that sounds, it's silly.
Yeah.
But it wasn't for them, because their Jewish tradition was so, the circumcision for the Jew was so important, because it's like baptism. You know, this makes you a part of the community. So should they have the Gentiles do that too? So, they had really fiery arguments, because Peter and Paul thought about this. Because Paul had different experiences than Peter, although Paul also was a Jew, but he somehow knew that there are things more important than that exterior.
So, yeah.
And he kept talking about the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law. And we still get hung up on that.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, we really like things to be black and white, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
And then we miss all those beautiful
It's sort of the downside of a logical thinker.
Yes.
In a way.
Yes. Because you get to that right away.
Yeah.
Because you see what is. And you have a love. You have a taste for what is right and just.
Mm-hmm.
That all goes together. With all of that discernment is easier. In a way, it's like that. You have a gut feeling. I know that this person is really good.
Mm-hmm.
He may do all kinds of crazy things, but there's good in this person, because somehow I've discerned that. Now, great saints like St. Ignatius of Loyola, being a man and thinking much more logically, so to speak, gave rules for discernment. And so people spend days reading what he said and trying to understand what he was talking about. But when it boils down to it, it has to be an act of faith. Now, Angela had a very much more simple way of discerning. First of all, she said, pray. First thing, pray. Second thing was, consult the company. In other words, don't make this decision by yourself. Talk to the members of the company. Get a feel for what they're saying. And then follow it through. And after you have done that, then you look at what happened. So it's like, are you willing to look at your actions and say, that was really dumb. I won't do that one again.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I made a mistake. Those are such hard words to get off the tongue. I was wrong. I made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to be able to reflect on your experience. That's part of discernment. So if you discern that this is a good thing to do and you try it and it blows up in your face, well, won't try that one again.
Mm-hmm.
So she's much different in the way she comes to decision making.
Mm-hmm.
It took her a long time, apparently, to find a way to do what she thought she was supposed to do. Now, a lot of stories have been written about that that the devil came and tempted her not to follow her way of life, which was virginity in the world. I mean, that was unthinkable. And so it's like that got thrown in her face. That's not right. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But she kept on calling to that. And then after the company got started, parents would not allow their children, their daughters, to join the company. This happened especially after Angela died, because as long as she was around, they knew that everything was okay, because she was the wisdom figure and they'd listen to her. But when her followers, her daughters, the first group after her, when they continued her way of life, they got a lot of feedback.
Mhm.
But discernment brings that, because there's always the choice that you might make that's not a good one.
Right.
And it's
I mean,
hard.
they could easily have devolved into being a cult.
Yeah, oh,
Mhm.
indeed they could have.
Yes.
Yes, and maybe some of them did,
Mhm.
you know? But they were careful, I guess, about the people they allowed into the company. I was reading the requirements the other day and I had to laugh out loud. The girl had to be 12.
Oh
Oh.
my.
Then the reason that's the age is that was when a girl became legally able to marry.
Right.
So, can you imagine, 12-year-olds, but this is a different time and age.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a 12-year-old was in a different stage of growth.
Right.
So, I cut you off. Was there some?
No, I was just gonna say that about the cult, that could be, the flip side, the dark side of
Exactly.
Angela's company. It could have devolved into that.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think that happens because so many leaders of a cult are charismatic people.
Mhm.
People are attracted to them.
Their
because
ego
they-
brings them
Yes,
down.
yes, so people gravitate to them and they may lead them to all kinds of crazy things
Mhm.
and it becomes a cult.
Mm.
But Angela was slow to do things. She was 65 before she started the company. I mean, she was an older woman. 65 in her time was much older
Right.
than it
Yeah.
is
Yes.
today. So she was well established in the city of Brescia and in the countryside. She was a businesswoman. She went home back to Desenzano every year to collect the rent.
Mm.
I always think that's interesting because I never knew that for a long time. And then in Desenzano, they have the records that show about her coming back every year to collect the rent from the farmers who rented her property. So she was a wise woman, she was smart, and she was also well-loved
Mm.
by a lot of people and a lot of important people.
Mhm.
But she made some dumb mistakes. It's just always makes me wonder. When she was dying, she appointed the woman who was to take her place. And her name was Lucretia something or other. And she undid a lot of things that Angela did.
Mhm.
So it's like, how did you not recognize that in this woman? Angela was hardly cold in her grave when Lucretia said that the virgins is what Angela always, the daughters were to wear a leather cincture. Now, in our day and age, the veil is the sign of, well, she must be a sister, she has a veil
Right.
on.
Mhm.
But in her day, it was the leather cincture belt. And so she had them all do that. I'll wear a leather belt, which is real, that was far from Angela's mind.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, Lucretia is always, sounds like a part of Dracula or something.
Oh, Lucretia Borgia.
Something
Yeah.
like that, yes. But she probably wasn't that, she just made a mistake.
Yeah.
Because right at the beginning, it caused a division in the company. And that was very hard, difficult
Yeah.
for the women. And a number of them left. And then it was this division. Some were doing this and some were doing this. But they eventually got back together after they talked and tried to discern together. So they mended that mistake that Lucretia had made. Anyway, so discernment is very important. It's part of wisdom, it's part of prophecy, and it's a very important thing for us today to pay attention. It goes back to what you said at the beginning. It's like, pay attention, pay attention. I know I have said this to you, but I'll say it again. A very important practice, you can call it what you will. It has a popular name called examen. Now, it is not an examination of conscience. It's an examination of consciousness. which is altogether different. And I always like to use the story of Moses when he came down from receiving the tablets from God. He came down, and the guys had all built a molten calf, and they were carrying on whatever. Moses was furious, so he throws down the tablets and goes back up the hill and says to God, I'm, putting this in my own words. Now listen, I'm finished with those people. I quit.
Yeah.
You take care of them. They're a pain in the neck. And he said to God, I wish you would talk to me face to face, like a man. And God said, Moses, you can't see me face to face, it still live. But I tell you what I'll do. I'll hide you in the cleft of the rock and put my hand over that, and then I'll trail by. I'll go by, and you can see me from the back. So, okay, Moses submitted to that, and that's what happened. God trailed past him, and Moses was floored. Well, really, he fell on his face and said, Yahweh, Yahweh, whose greatness is beyond measure from generation to generation. So he got it, but he saw it from the back. It's like, so reflecting on what has gone past is important in order to look to the future. So that's what examination of consciousness is about, to reflect on how did my day go. And if I see, I did this morning, and I really felt filled with joy when I did that. That was it. That was a good thing. And here I was doing something good, but I don't know, I was in a foul mood, and I was, said nasty things to people. No, isn't a good thing. So it's like, I don't know that unless I know my experiences. I don't mean to make it so introspective. It's like navel gazing, but it's like, if I don't know where I've come from this day, how do I go to the next day to correct, redo what I did yesterday?
Or to learn from it.
Or to learn from it. Yes. So that's the examination of consciousness. And it's neither, I don't have to judge the way my day goes, but it's like paying attention. What brought me the fruits of the Holy Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness. I recognize those in my life. I always say to people, if you don't recognize it in your life, you're not paying attention. Because we have received the fruits of the Holy Spirit. We have to watch for them. Where are they? I mean, you can look for your bad things all day long, and you won't have any trouble finding them.
Right.
But this is something else. This is seeing, where did God trail in your life today? Where did you see God? We had a pastor one time who said, God comes to us in the oddest shapes, and it's really the truth. There was this little boy at the fair. We went to the fair last week, and they had smaller animals in a place.
Like a petting zoo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except you weren't supposed to touch them. But there was this big tub, like it was probably size half of the space right here, and had water in it, and there were little ducks swimming in it, and there was a construction in the middle of it that kind of they weren't steps, but duckies had to climb up, and up at the top there was some seed, so they would take the seed and slide down the other side. It was so much fun. They looked like they were having a good time. The guys would come down, and then they'd go back here and get back and keep doing it. It was like a game they were playing. And this little boy, I don't know how old he was. He wasn't talking a whole lot, so maybe 3, something like that. He was enamored. He was so excited. He kept jumping up and down. Look. He was by himself. I don't know if his parents or whoever he was with ever came and watched with him, but he was wonderful. So there you are, joy and excitement and amazement at what he was seeing. What an experience of God. So for him, God's appearance were those little ducks. that joy of seeing what they were doing and what fun the ducks were having, except there was this one dumb duck. He would climb up that set and hit his head on the bar that was up there. You would think he would not do it the next time, but he would. The same
Every
duck
time.
kept hitting that bar.
That's cute.
But anyway, you watch where God has been. I think today it's like, I can see God's love in the rain. Oh, we need it so badly.
Yes.
And so, there it is.
Mhm.
And the trees are glad. The grass is glad. So, today we can be grateful for rain and see God's care for us in the rain. Sometimes we have to say to God, we have to figure out how to be careful about rain and water, because that's where wisdom comes from. God didn't say, okay, just, live in this world and don't do anything to it. It's live in this world and take care of it. And so we are trying to learn that. In spite of, or because of climate change, we had better be learning how to
Yeah.
take care of our earth. Anyway, so that has something to do with discernment, I think,
Yes.
paying attention. I used to tell people, if you do this examen of consciousness every day for 90 days,
Mhm.
it carries a 90-day guarantee. You'll keep doing it.
Hmm.
Not because of guilt if I don't do it, but because of the joy and,
Mhm.
I don't know, fulfillment or something that we get from doing that. Anyway, so there's some of those are three of the virtues that Angela had
Mhm.
that are recognized by the church. And because it's important that we realize the church recognized that, because those gifts are for all of us. Whenever there's something holy and good, we know that it's not just for me to hold on to, but it's to be given away. And so we learn from Angela's sense of learning discernment and having wisdom and claiming our gift of prophecy, of being able to read the times and know from my wisdom where I'm headed and where other people may be headed, especially your grandchildren.
Yeah.
And then lovingly be with them. Okay, you have anything you'd like to say?
I don't think I have anything to add.
Yeah. It's very insightful.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Absolutely.
And
Oh, yeah.
I think everything for me is captured in that simple phrase, pay attention. So you look at wisdom, you look at prophecy, and you look at discernment. And I'd probably put them in a different order. I'd probably put discernment, wisdom, and then prophecy. And I don't know that it's linear, but
Yeah.
in my mind,
It's more like a triangle.
and maybe it's a
Right.
triangle, but all of those are about paying attention.
Yeah.
And that your example of the rain, that reminder of in that paying attention, that's where we're going to see God. So I think that just that expression, pay attention, captures all three of these virtues.
Yes. the whole 2 books can be summarized in the last 2 chapters.